The Galactic Council was on the brink of a most critical negotiation in millennia. The long, bloody war that had consumed the galaxy was finally reaching its final phase. Alien species, some with technology far beyond Earth's reach, were ready to sign a peace treaty. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph, the dawn of a new era. But no one expected the arrival of Alexander Grant, a human diplomat with no political experience, no alliances, and a reputation for defying expectations. He was an enigma, a wild card. And as the doors to the council chamber opened, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The vast, gleaming hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species, each more powerful and ancient than the last. Humanoid figures, towering insectoids, shimmering beings of light. Each one had played a part in this war. Their faces were etched with centuries of wisdom, or in some cases, a history of cruelty. Now, they waited for the human to speak. Alexander walked into the chamber with a calm that only a soldier accustomed to battle could possess. His stance was steady, his eyes sharp, scanning the room with a quiet confidence that drew the attention of every leader present. For a human to even be included in such high-level talks was a statement in itself. For a human to take the podium, however, uninvited, unacknowledged, was an act of defiance. He had no credentials, no title, no family name to back him. Just the stark reality that Earth, a fledgling world among ancient civilizations, had somehow found a place in the galaxy's most powerful council. The council president, an ancient and respected leader of the Torgal species, cleared his throat. His massive form shifted in his seat as his voice boomed across the room. Human Grant, we have allowed you to speak, but understand this. Your presence here is an anomaly. You are not a part of the galactic elite. You are not from a system that commands respect. So tell us, what is your purpose in these talks? For a brief moment, Alexander stood still. The weight of his words, the expectations of the entire galaxy, pressed down on him. He could feel the eyes of the council and their respective species on him, watching, judging, waiting for his every move. But Alexander had fought wars of a different kind. Wars fought in the shadows, wars that most would never speak of. He had faced death with nothing but his will to survive. He would not flinch now. I'm here to stop the galaxy from making the same mistake twice, he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. And I'm here to make sure humanity is not forgotten in this so-called peace. The room fell silent. The very notion that Earth, only just emerging from its own internal strife, had anything to offer in these discussions seemed absurd. The Torgal's yellow eyes narrowed. Your people have no standing here. You have no influence. You are not even a power on the scale of the factions present. Alexander's lips curled into a thin smile. He knew this response was coming. It was the same response humanity had received for centuries from every other species they had encountered in the stars: dismissal. In every confrontation, in every negotiation, humans had been the underdog. But somehow, they had always found a way to survive. That's the mistake you're making, Alexander continued, his voice gaining strength. You're looking at us as if we're just a fledgling species, just another rock in the galaxy. But Earth has something no one here has. Something you've forgotten. Humanity knows how to survive. And when it comes to survival, there's no one more dangerous than us. A ripple of unease moved through the council. The Torgal leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. But before he could speak, Alexander raised a hand. I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here because you're about to make a deal that will cost you everything you worked for. The war is ending, yes. But it's not over. Not by a long shot. The tension in the room grew, palpable and thick. The leaders of the galaxy had spent centuries in conflict, each side playing the long game, treaties forged, alliances built, and betrayals woven into every political move. The thought that a human diplomat, with no experience in galactic politics, would come here and disrupt everything was almost laughable. Almost. But Alexander was undeterred. He knew what was at stake, and more importantly, he knew what humanity was capable of when pushed to its limits. He wasn't here to play by their rules. He was here to change them. Survival is not about diplomacy. It's about leverage. The words hung in the air as Alexander Grant stared down the faces of the galaxy's most powerful species. He had broken the silence with a statement that no one had expected. The weight of that simple truth was heavier than any weapon the Council could wield. It wasn't just diplomacy that made humanity dangerous. It was their willingness to fight for survival at any cost. And right now, the Council needed to understand that. The room was a sea of skepticism. Leaders from every corner of the galaxy shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another as if to check for some hidden agenda. Alexander, the uninvited human, had just called their centuries of political maneuvering into question. Tlan, the stoic and calculating representative from the Shirak species, was the first to speak. His sharp, angular features reflected the cold intelligence that had earned his race respect across the stars. You seem to believe that survival alone is enough to guarantee victory. But you underestimate the power of the Council, human. You have no standing here. Alexander didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before. Maybe. But you've been playing checkers while we've been playing chess. The Tlan's eyes narrowed, a flicker of acknowledgement crossing his face. He was sharp. He understood the implication. Humanity wasn't just trying to survive anymore. They were preparing to win. The negotiations continued, but Alexander had already changed the course of the conversation. While the Council debated trivialities, Alexander focused on what was truly at stake. The peace they were negotiating was a fragile thread, one that would collapse the moment one faction gained too much power. The entire galaxy knew it. Some of the members were even preparing for another war, thinking it was inevitable. But that wasn't the human way. Alexander was determined to show them that there was another path forward. The Torgul president, his enormous bulk casting a shadow over the proceedings, leaned forward, his voice booming with authority. What exactly are you suggesting, human? That we abandon centuries of political strategy and allow you to guide us? I'm suggesting, Alexander said, his tone steady, that you all take a step back and look at the bigger picture. This war has been dragging on for centuries, with no clear victor. But there's one thing you haven't realized. If you don't change your approach now, you'll all be fighting each other again within the next few decades. The galaxy is too unstable, too fractured. A hushed murmur spread through the room. He was right. Deep down, every leader in the chamber knew the war had been a temporary fix, not a solution. Power was shifting constantly. Alliances were shifting faster. The thought of another galactic conflict loomed like a shadow over every word spoken. What do you propose, then? The voice came from another corner of the room, an alien species with bioluminescent skin that flickered with energy. That we hand over the keys to the galaxy to Earth. No, Alexander replied sharply. I'm proposing that Earth, humanity, be allowed to carve out a seat at the table. Not as a token race or as some secondary player in your galactic games, but as an equal. You don't have to like us, but you have to respect us. The Council went quiet. The sheer audacity of the proposal struck like lightning. Earth, a young and often underestimated species, demanding not just peace, but power. Alexander wasn't asking for favors. He wasn't here for the political games. Humanity had already fought its way through countless battles, and they had learned one undeniable truth. Strength lies not just in weapons, but in the ability to survive, to adapt, and to turn the tables when least expected. I don't need your approval, Alexander continued, but if you want a lasting peace, you'll need more than just treaties. You'll need real change. And change only comes when you start recognizing the forces that truly shape the galaxy. A ripple of uncertainty washed through the room. The negotiation was no longer about who controlled what. It was about which species could assert its authority in this rapidly shifting galactic landscape. Alexander's words had shifted the narrative. His proposal wasn't just about Earth. It was about creating a framework where all races would be forced to rethink their strategies. The silence was broken by the leader of the Grak, a militaristic race known for their brutish methods. And what would you have us do, human? Turn over our weapons? Abandon centuries of conquest? His voice rumbled, filled with skepticism. Not abandon, Alexander countered. Reform. Adapt. The galaxy doesn't need more power struggles. It needs unity. If you can't see that, then you're more blind than I thought. The Torgul president eyed him warily. And what makes you think humanity can accomplish such a thing? Alexander's gaze sharpened, locking onto the president. Because we've had to fight for everything. Peace doesn't come easy for us. But when humanity fights, we don't just fight for land or resources. We fight for something greater, survival itself. And when the galaxy sees that, when it understands the true strength of humanity, no one will ever underestimate us again. There it was, the essence of the human spirit. The council might have dismissed them for centuries, but Alexander knew that the one thing humanity had in abundance was determination. And that would be enough to shape the future of the galaxy. As the room buzzed with murmurs, one thing was clear. Alexander Grant had not only secured humanity's place at the table, he had forced the council to rethink everything. The galaxy's future was no longer certain. And now, humanity had a chance to shape it. There are moments when the truth is more dangerous than any weapon. For Alexander Grant, that moment arrived when he uncovered a plot within the very walls of the Galactic Council. A conspiracy so deep, so insidious, that the galaxy's future was hanging by a thread, one that he was now holding. The peace talks had been progressing, but there was an undercurrent of tension he couldn't ignore. It wasn't the Siltar. Their motives were clear, but the deeper currents running through the council itself. Alexander had sensed it since the beginning, something off, something that didn't align with the supposed unity the council was pushing. The subtle glances exchanged between some of the leaders, the hushed conversations that ceased the moment he entered the room. He had learned to read those signs in the shadows of war. But now the truth was undeniable. It came to light when a trusted ally clan slipped him a discreet message. Meet me at the subchamber. Tonight. It's worse than you think. The room had been empty, the silence broken only by the hum of distant machinery. As soon as Alexander entered, Tlan wasted no time. The Siltar are not the only ones scheming, Grant, Tlan said, voice low urgent. Some of the most influential species in this room want humanity gone before the peace talks succeed. Alexander's instinct screamed that he was on the verge of something catastrophic. Who? The Torgul, the Zalor, and Tlan hesitated, clearly torn. And some factions within the Grak. They've been maneuvering against you, against humanity. Not for conquest, but for something more insidious. They want to ensure you never have the chance to become a power. The revelation hit like a shockwave. He had suspected that certain factions were playing a dangerous game, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. These were some of the most powerful factions in the galaxy, each with their own interests and vast resources. The idea that they could work in the shadows to sideline humanity, to eliminate the very chance of Earth being recognized as a galactic player, was chilling. They've planted spies, Tlan continued, in your delegation in the peace talks. But more than that, they're working with the Siltar to manipulate the vote. The treaty you're fighting for? It's a smokescreen. They want to make sure you're nothing more than a pawn. Alexander's jaw clenched. His mind raced, weighing the consequences. If Tlan was right, and he had no reason to doubt him, the galaxy's fragile peace was about to be shattered. If these factions controlled the treaty's outcome, they could lock humanity out of any real power, relegating them to the status of a minor race, as they had done for centuries. There's no time to waste, Alexander muttered. We have to expose this before they make their move. Tlan nodded grimly. I've already begun gathering evidence. But it's dangerous. These factions are more entrenched than you think. They'll stop at nothing to protect their interests. Alexander paced, thoughts spinning. He couldn't allow this to happen. Not after everything humanity had fought for. The peace talks were supposed to bring an end to the war, but if this conspiracy went unchecked, it would be the start of a much darker chapter for humanity. He had to act fast, but not recklessly. The council was already watching him, judging his every move. Any misstep could doom Earth's chance for a meaningful role in the galaxy. But he had no choice. The stakes were too high. "We need to turn the tables on them," Alexander said, his voice steady. "We can't play by their rules anymore. I'll confront them directly. If they think they can manipulate the Council, we'll expose them for what they are." Clan frowned, clearly uneasy. "And if they retaliate?" "They won't go down without a fight, Alexander." "I know," he replied, his eyes hardening. "But we don't have the luxury of waiting. If we're going to secure Earth's place in the galaxy, we have to do it now, before they pull the rug out from under us." With a final nod, Clan turned and handed Alexander a small data pad. "Here's what I've gathered. Use it wisely." As Alexander left the subchamber, the weight of the galaxy felt heavier on his shoulders. He had entered these talks with a clear goal: peace for humanity. Now, that goal had become something much more dangerous: survival. The truth had been laid bare before him, and he couldn't turn away. In the coming days, every decision, every word, would be scrutinized. The conspiracy was no longer a shadow on the horizon. It was at the heart of the peace talks, and humanity's future would depend on his ability to expose it before it was too late. The council chamber was a battleground of ideas, each faction vying for dominance. But now, it had become a stage for something far more dangerous: the truth. The truth that humanity had a role to play in the galaxy, and the galaxy's oldest powers would stop at nothing to ensure Earth remained a pawn in their game. Alexander Grant stood at the center of it all, a single human in the midst of a storm, determined to expose the forces conspiring against him. The conspiracy was bigger than he had imagined. The Torgul, the Zalor, and the Grak were just the tip of the iceberg. The Siltar, their manipulative influence spreading through the council, had found willing allies within the very factions they had hoped to avoid. Each step Alexander took now carried the weight of survival, not just for humanity, but for the galaxy itself. The peace talks were no longer about diplomacy. They were about power. And the only way to secure Earth's future was to outsmart the players who had rigged the system for eons. Alexander knew the game had changed. The council was no longer an arena for delicate negotiations. It was a political minefield, and every word, every gesture, could set off an explosion. To succeed, he would need more than just political savvy. He would need alliances, trust, and the one thing the council had never expected: human ingenuity. He met with his closest allies in secret. Clan, the Shirak diplomat who had become his trusted confidant, had smuggled out vital information from the subchamber. The evidence was clear. The conspiracy against humanity was systematic, and it went all the way to the top. The peace treaty, they had realized, was a decoy, a veil for the true power struggle unfolding beneath the surface. "We need to act," Clan urged, his voice tight with urgency. "The council's decision is imminent. They're planning to vote on the terms tomorrow. And if we don't move quickly, they'll solidify humanity's position as nothing more than a footnote in history." Alexander's mind raced. He couldn't allow that to happen. Humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't just a matter of political maneuvering. It was a matter of survival. If Earth wasn't granted a legitimate seat at the table now, they would be left at the mercy of the Council's oldest, most entrenched factions. And the moment Earth was sidelined, the galaxy would descend into chaos. "What do you suggest?" Alexander asked, looking at Clan with a resolve he hadn't felt before. "How do we convince them? The entire council is compromised." Clan paused, then spoke with grim determination. "We expose their lies. We show the council that they've been manipulated, that their so-called allies have been working against them all along. If we make it clear that this peace isn't genuine, it will force them to reconsider their position." Alexander nodded. Clan was right. The only way to force the council into action was to pull the veil off their deception. The Siltar, the Torgul, the Grak, they had all built a house of cards, and the moment one piece was pulled, the entire structure would collapse. "I'll do it," Alexander said, his voice steady. "But we need to move quickly. We can't let them get the vote through." Clan handed him a data pad. "I've compiled everything the council needs to see." If we release this information at the right moment, it will spark the chaos we need. But it has to be done publicly. The Council can't ignore it if it's broadcasted to the entire galaxy. Alexander studied the datapad, his fingers hovering over the screen. The conspiracy was more extensive than he had imagined, and it implicated some of the most influential figures in the galaxy. But it wasn't enough to just expose them. He needed to make the galaxy understand why it mattered. The peace talks were a front, a carefully crafted illusion to hide the real power struggle. If humanity wasn't included in the new galactic order, there would be no peace, only perpetual instability. The next day, the Council convened in the Grand Chamber, the members ready to finalize the treaty. As the leaders took their seats, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew that today's decision would shape the future of the galaxy, and the weight of that responsibility was heavy on their shoulders. But the members didn't know that Alexander Grant had come prepared. He stepped forward, calm but resolute, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the room. "I'm here to expose the truth. This peace is nothing more than a charade, a way to ensure that Earth remains weak, a pawn to be discarded once the dust settles." A ripple of disbelief spread through the Council. The Torgul president's massive form shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you mean, human?" "I mean this." Alexander held up the datapad, its contents visible to the entire chamber. "This is the evidence of a conspiracy that has been orchestrated by some of the most powerful factions here. They've been manipulating the peace talks, ensuring that Earth will never be allowed to rise to prominence. They fear us, and they will stop at nothing to ensure that we remain irrelevant." The Council's leaders exchanged uncertain glances. The truth was out. The peace they had been preparing for was a lie, and Alexander had the proof. "Do you think we will let you manipulate us, human?" The voice came from a GRAC representative, their deep, rumbling tone filled with menace. "I'm not manipulating anyone," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "I'm offering you the chance to see the truth before it's too late. This is the galaxy's moment to evolve. Will you let it slip away because of your fear?" The room fell silent. The future of the galaxy had just been put into motion. But Alexander knew this was only the beginning. The Council had been exposed, and now humanity had a choice: to accept their place in the galaxy or fight for a seat at the table. The war for peace had just begun. The moment Alexander Grant exposed the conspiracy, the room erupted into chaos. The Council members, each one a powerhouse in their own right, had never expected to be challenged like this. But what truly shook them wasn't just the evidence. It was the undeniable truth that humanity was no longer a side player in the galactic drama. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. The chamber was filled with shouts, accusations, and scrambling voices, each faction reacting in its own way. Some tried to distance themselves from the conspiracy, claiming ignorance. Others, more pragmatic, recognized the threat for what it was: a critical pivot in the galactic balance of power. Alexander watched it all unfold, knowing that the game had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Torgul president, his massive form looming over the room, stood with an air of barely contained fury. "You dare accuse us of treachery?" he roared, his voice rumbling like an approaching storm. "I'm not accusing anyone," Alexander responded coldly. "I'm showing you the truth. You've all been played by your own allies. The Siltar and their cronies have been pulling the strings while you played at peace. Now it's time to see the galaxy for what it really is." A tense silence followed, the weight of Alexander's words sinking in. The Torgul leader glared at him, but even his imposing presence couldn't silence the whispers that now filled the room. The silence was broken only when the Zalar representative, a sleek, silver-skinned being, stood and addressed the chamber. "Human Grant speaks with conviction," the Zalar said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "But the truth is not so simple. If what he claims is true, then we are all complicit in this farce. And that's why we need to act," Alexander countered, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension. "This galaxy is on the brink of chaos, and if we don't stop this now, we'll all be dragged into another war." The Siltar and their puppets are already making their move. If we don't expose them, they will use us all. The silence that followed was heavy. The council members, now grappling with the weight of Alexander's challenge. They had spent centuries maneuvering for dominance, but they had underestimated one thing: humanity's ability to adapt, to fight back when cornered. The GRAC representative stood next, his deep voice carrying the unmistakable tone of suspicion. "And what would you have us do, human? Expose them and risk destroying the fragile peace we fought for?" Alexander met his gaze without flinching. "Expose them, yes, but not destroy the peace. We have to understand one thing. Peace built on lies is not peace at all. It's a time bomb waiting to explode. If we let the Siltar dictate the terms of peace, they'll destabilize the entire galaxy. You think humanity is a threat? Wait until you see what happens when they're pushed to the edge." The GRAC's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The others, however, were listening. For the first time, they were beginning to see the potential consequences of their complacency. Alexander wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was a catalyst. He was forcing them to confront the reality they had ignored for too long. "We have to move quickly," Alexander continued, his voice steady. "I've already secured alliances with factions who will support us. There are more of us than you think. The galaxy is shifting, and if you want to survive, you have to recognize humanity's role in that future." A low murmur spread across the chamber as the council members deliberated. Alexander had put the truth in front of them, and now they had to choose: continue playing the old game and risk losing everything, or shift the balance in favor of a new order. The Torgul president was the first to break the silence, his voice a low growl. "You speak of survival. What makes you think humanity can survive this, Grant? We've lived longer than you can imagine. We've weathered wars, betrayals, and peace treaties. And yet, you believe your people can just shift the galaxy." Alexander's gaze never wavered. "Because humanity doesn't quit. We've survived more than anyone here can comprehend. And we will do whatever it takes to protect our place in this galaxy." For the first time in the negotiations, there was a flicker of hesitation in the eyes of the council leaders. The truth was undeniable. Humanity had become more than just a pawn in their game. They were a force, one that could change the rules of the game entirely. The tension in the room was palpable as the council members considered their next move. They had no choice but to acknowledge the growing influence of Earth. Alexander had shifted the balance, but the real battle had only just begun. As the chamber descended into hushed conversations and private discussions, one thing was clear: the future of the galaxy was no longer in the hands of the old powers. Humanity had claimed its seat at the table. Now, it was time to see if they could hold it. The final vote was upon them. The room was thick with tension, the air almost suffocating. Alexander Grant stood at the center of it all, knowing that in just moments, the fate of humanity and the galaxy would be decided. Every word, every move now carried the weight of survival. The question was no longer if humanity could carve out a future, but whether the galaxy's oldest powers would allow it. The council chamber was filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy, all of them watching with bated breath. The Torgul, the GRAC, the Zalor, and countless others, their eyes now turned toward humanity's unexpected representative. The conspiracy Alexander had exposed was no longer a secret, but its consequences were still unknown. Would the council stand united, or would the lies that had once bound them together rip the galaxy apart? "Human Grant," boomed the Torgul president, his voice deep and imposing, "you've made your accusations. You've shaken the very foundation of our peace talks. But now you must face the truth. If we expose the truth behind this conspiracy, what happens to the galaxy?" Alexander stepped forward, his expression unwavering. "It changes everything. The galaxy's future depends on this moment. If you choose to bury the truth, to let these factions control the peace, then you will set the stage for another war, one far worse than anything you faced before. But if you choose to act, to recognize the damage that's been done, we can create something better, a true peace." The council murmured, but Alexander could see it in their eyes. the hesitation, the realization that the truth he had exposed was more than just a political maneuver. It was a battle for the very soul of the galaxy. We've built empires, conquered worlds, and yet you suggest we let a human dictate the course of our future. The GRAC representative's voice was thick with contempt, but there was a slight tremor behind it. The reality of what Alexander was saying was starting to sink in. "No," Alexander replied, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'm suggesting that we stop pretending that power alone will bring peace. You've been playing a game that no longer fits the galaxy's reality. Humanity's place in this galaxy isn't just about survival. It's about creating a future where peace is more than just a fleeting illusion." A brief silence followed. Then the Zala representative, the sleek, silver-skinned alien, stood up. His sharp eyes studied Alexander, and for the first time, Alexander saw a flicker of respect. "He speaks with conviction," the Zalar said slowly. "And I think I speak for many of us when I say that we're tired of the lies. The time for hidden agendas has passed." The Torgul president scowled, but there was no mistaking the shift in the room. The truth had taken root, and it was no longer just Alexander against the council. It was the council against itself. "Enough," the Torgul president muttered, his voice filled with reluctant acceptance. "We will vote. But know this, human. If the peace fails because of your actions, it will be on your head." Alexander's heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained calm. The vote was a mere formality now. He had exposed the conspiracy, and with it, forced the council to confront the reality they had long ignored. The next few minutes would determine if humanity truly had a future in this galaxy. The voting began, each representative casting their vote, one by one. The room was deathly silent as the votes were tallied. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the results were announced. "The vote is in," the Torgul president declared, his voice heavy. "The council has agreed to the new terms. Humanity will be granted full representation, and the peace treaty will be amended to reflect a new balance of power." A wave of disbelief rippled through the room. The old powers had been forced to accept a new reality. Humanity had secured its place, not as a subordinate, but as an equal in the galaxy. But Alexander knew the battle wasn't over. This victory, while significant, was only the beginning. The forces that had conspired against humanity wouldn't vanish overnight. There would be new challenges, new enemies, and new tests. But for the first time in galactic history, humanity had stood up and changed the course of the future. As the chamber began to stir, with murmurs of congratulations and veiled threats, Alexander Grant allowed himself a single moment of quiet satisfaction. They had done it. Earth had a seat at the table, and with it, the chance to shape the galaxy's destiny. For now, victory was theirs. But the true war for peace, for survival, was only just beginning.